to the ASEAN Clean Energy Week 2023 online interview. My name is Kayla, content analysis from Leader Associates. Today, we are honored to interview with Ms. Karim Megherbi, Executive Director of Orisun Invest. Orisun Invest is a leading business platform with a global presence, especially in renewable energy asset origination, structuring, and the sale acquisition of such assets. They provide crucial support for both project developers and investors to facilitate energy project transactions. Now, let's explore key insights from Mr. Karim about the wind energy markets in Philippines and how Orisun Invest can contribute to their development. First of all, the Asian region is emerging as a promising market for wind energy. How would you compare the potential and the challenges of the wind energy market in Vietnam and the Philippines? Are there any notable differences between these two markets?
Well, thank you, Kayla, for your question. So, well, so Orisun Invest, indeed, it's a origination platform, meaning that we put together investors and developers in different markets. We're specialized actually mostly in emerging markets, and Southeast Asia, actually, and Central Asia are very important markets for us. We're also active in Europe, Africa, and a bit of South America. We have one transaction there. So in the past 3 years, we closed 650 megawatts. Our objective, and we feel it's within the next 12 months, we probably reach 1 gigawatt. So our objective is to at least reach this number within the next 12 months. So we are indeed active actually in both markets, Vietnam and the Philippines. For Vietnam, we've been looking at different transactions for the past, I would say, 3 years, both in wind and solar, because we do both. And the Philippines will mainly look at solar projects, although we have partners there. We know that they are developing wind projects and it's quite active. So that being said, are there any differences between the markets? Yes. I mean, unfortunately, that's the reality of the energy, renewable energy markets actually around the world. There's, all of them have cultural, regulatory framework, industrial, energy mix, context, etc., are very different. And so that's, by the way, that's also the reason why we set up Orisun. It's because, we want to facilitate that and to help investors or developers to bridge, these difficulties, which is that you need to adapt, all the time to a very new or very different context from one country to another. But there are some similarities also. So between Vietnam and the Philippines, I would say roughly, you have 100 million, population, and coal actually is very much part of the energy mix today, the power mix today. It's 40%, in those countries. And, they have also some issues regarding land. You need to find the appropriate site, grid connection also, transmission line needs to be developed and so on. So you have some similarities. At the same time, the regulatory framework is very different today. So in Vietnam, it has been there was a big slowdown because the uncertainties regarding the regulatory framework. There is no possibility for you to sell electricity somehow unless you have some direct agreement. You provide directly electricity to some of the customers, which is called the CNI market. But the auctions were stopped and the feed-in tariff did not start, and the feed-in tariff stopped. So developers have been negotiating their price for now 1 or 2 years. That's for onshore, and for offshore, they have been always negotiating this price and PPA framework and so on without so far any result. So we don't know yet actually when the market will restart next year. Last year, there was no installation of wind. We think that this year we'll see new wind farms commissioned because there was an agreement on the feed-in tariff price for previous projects. So that's the situation in Vietnam, and the future looks, we think, very, very good. By we, I mean not only us as Orisun, but also, the reports and the different studies and projections. Certainly, Vietnam and the Philippines are important market. They are committed to, renewable energy, reach net zero targets, greening their energy system. They also feared, because of Ukraine, and the issue was the oil and gas market. Everyone saw the prices, coming up, and it destabilized the economies, and so people were concerned, and so there is a big move actually in having capacity installed that you can manage yourself, and you don't need actually fuel from external resources. So you have this trend which is there, but you see, still there need to be some changes in the way we approach renewable energy and the overall framework, industrialization. It's a new way to manage your power system. So now in the Philippines, well, they have way more experience because the Vietnam, I've seen a very big boom in the last years, but Philippines actually, the starting renewable energy is coming much from, for 10 years plus. So there is a framework which is much more sophisticated, and there was a clear trend. But similarly to Vietnam, actually, for the past years, there was a big stop. Now it has resumed, and many developers or investors feel that, well, now it's the right time, and they will resume the capacity, the installation of renewable energy. And I was in the Philippines last year, and that's, a country which was also very much impacted by high oil prices and so on. And so there was, certainly even citizens actually realized that, when they go to fuel their car, that there's something wrong here, and that something must be changed. So Philippines is also involved in, managing its energy demand. There has been, a clear understanding of, the energy transition. It's both actually greening the power generation, but also managing your demand. If you can't manage your demand, it's very difficult. So there has been this context, but still it's very difficult. And why it's difficult, it's because, again, you have two ways to get, an offtake agreement in the Philippines. One is the tender, so that's fine. So you participate in the tenders, but you see I would say the size of the tenders is still a bit small. And also, the dynamic of the tenders is, you need to wait, and the timeline is not very clear. So that's number one. Number two, you can have also PPA or direct agreement with some of takers, but that also is very unclear because you don't know if at the end of the day you need to be auctioned or not in your projects. So meaning that you may develop your projects, and then after that it's being auctioned publicly, and so you may lose your project that you've been developing for a few years. So I feel that, although developers are very active, and it's mostly local developers today, it's difficult because the regulatory framework is asking developers to take many risks in terms of, land securing and so on, whereas we don't have a clarity actually of how you get the PPA, will you be chosen, etc. So there are differences in terms of, timing in the energy transition between these two countries. There are differences between regulatory framework, but they are challenging, which are very similar regarding grid, land, all these things.
Yeah, thanks for your very detailed sharing. And Orisun Invest is known for its expertise in project development. Could you discuss the strategies or priorities your company will consider when investors and the developers entering the Philippines wind market?
Well, thank you for the question. So, well, so for Vietnam, it's very unclear actually when the market will resume Some says within the next year, some says 2025. So for now, there's kind of the market has been really stalled, and if developers want to, investors want to, support development of new projects, waiting for the new regulatory framework, that's fine. But the uncertainties here are there. So we think, and as many that these countries anyway will go for renewable energy because it's cheaper, it's quick to install, it's much better than coal projects, which are difficult to finance. They have environmental issues. At the end of the day, prices are not that low also. And compared to solar, it's a no-brainer basically. When you look at the prices of solar today and what you can get through auction, and even you see the revised tariff for wind in Vietnam, which is below 8. It's very attractive. There's no reason why you would continue to invest in at this stage, in fossil fuel generation assets. That anyway these assets will not last long. And even for countries which are growing, there's certainly a way to about your power system in a way that is cheaper, more competitive, more reliable, together with renewable energy. So the trends are there, and the macroeconomics and rationals are there. Certainly, it's beyond actually the climate obligations and so on. Today, it's a business decision. It's a wise business decision to invest in renewable and change your energy system in a way that it's that you can manage it without external, and protect yourself to external shocks. As a reminder, last year, because of the of the crisis in Ukraine, and Russia, the world actually spent more than $7 trillion, just in fossil fuel subsidies, including externalities. This is the IMF report about fossil fuel subsidies. And if you compare to the total investment cost, or investment required, to do the energy, to transit completely, to change completely your power system in Europe, for example. So by 2050, this amounts of investment is like around 5 trillion. So it means that in 1 year, just because of a crisis, we spend actually the whole budget of the energy transition on the power sector for Europe. So this is when you realize that and how you are impacted by this crisis, it's a very sound business decision. So now, despite the unclear system, you may want to invest. Now, in terms of acquisition, which is what we do also M&A, we feel that it's difficult these days because there's no real incentives, for both investors and developers to find today, an agreement on an acquisition, because we don't know yet at which price electricity will be sold. So valuation of assets today is complicated. So unless there are some, strategic business incentives or rationals behind such decision, we don't see the M&A market really very, very much active. Now, in the Philippines, it's a very interesting time probably to invest because there is some clarity on the regulatory framework, thanks to the auction. So you may want to prepare for the auction. Partner with local developers. They are keen on finding partners. There are banks which are very good to provide non-recourse financing and so on. So now the bridge that you need to cross is regarding development cost and risk, because all the time you have land issues. You need to actually change the use of your land between agricultural to industrial, and that's a whole administrative process, which is that is very difficult to manage if you're not very much in the country for many years and by heart how to do that. So partnering with local developers is, I think, very, very useful, and find an agreement how to work on the development cost and mitigate the risk and sharing the risk, etc. There are very good developers actually in the Philippines which are ready to take some risk, and so having an agreement with them is, could be interesting. So both wind, solar. So that's usually what, that's what we're looking for in the Philippines. And that's what we, offer to our investors, which are, usually very large international players like Total Energy, for example, with whom we have a long-term, agreement.
Yeah, thank you very much. And the last question for you is, given your experience, could you provide some examples of which implemented in other markets and how this could be applied to the Philippines wind market to enhance project success?
Yeah, I mean, we can. So I can. So well, recently we were awarded the project in Sri Lanka. I mean, we brought together the members of the consortium that won the tender, which is the largest solar tender in the country, was and with the PPA actually based in USD. So it's the first ever PPA actually of the country, which is bankable from the international point of view. And so how did we do that? I mean, you see the country is basically in default today. So they can't repay the debt, but that's something that will change in the future. So, well, number one, investors active in, Philippines, Vietnam, etc. Well, they need to understand that um, these markets, they are ups and downs. So you need to have a global view actually on the region, and you need to think actually about the economies which are behind, and if countries have very strong rationals in terms of GDP growth, how they manage their economies, etc. So when you look at the growth actually in the region, we still have 6%, 8%. Although it has been slowed down with COVID-19, you still have very much growth and energy demand actually, which is growing, and certainly fossil fuel is not the way to go to fuel this growth, in case you want to actually manage well your cost and so on. So I'm not saying it's an easy path, because you need to have a long-term view, and certainly countries have to maybe put more efforts into having a long-term planning, and especially draft net zero scenarios, which are in line with what they believe as what they need actually, really, in terms of energy demand, cost that they want to reach, etc., etc. So that is not yet there. Okay, so certainly investors, they may feel that, okay, where should I invest? How should I work in such countries, etc. So for us, what we do is we try to insist on those strong economics behind that, and try to find the right projects that would fit to the investors. So again, for Sri Lanka, we were there because, and we brought international investors despite the difficult situation, because we had the PPA, which is bankable, and that's a first for the country, and you had DFIs, development financial institutions, backing the country, and now we see the appetite on the project itself. Now, in Bangladesh also, we had also a good, success in a sense that land is very difficult. So we try to work with local developers who actually own the land, and we were successful in that. And we have an agreement now between our international investor and a local player, and we hope to get the LOI soon. But for the Philippines, I would say it's the same, right? You may have a lot of developments, but ultimately, and then not feel comfortable because land issues, because there are development costs associated. So I would say recommendation, but our approach actually in discussion is to try to have the developers understand also the requirements from investors, and why they request that, and try to address as much as possible their requests. And at the same time, investors also need to understand that well, Philippines is not Germany, it's not France, it's not Vietnam, or it's not so any country, all countries, they have their own specificities, so they need to adapt somehow to that. Now returns. is an issue because you have this inflation these days. So how obviously investors they would request slightly higher returns because of inflation. Now bonds or sovereign loans, etc. They have increased. So the cost of capital basically has increased. So here we need to address that. Hopefully, solar panels has decreased, the cost, but for wind industry these days it has increased. And so, well, how do we address that? Well, there's a timing issue. The agreement that you signed today is for a year or two, the project. So you need to look at, what are the projections, and basically it's unstoppable, right? This trend with renewable energy. So you need to just have the right ingredients and recipe to make sure that you can have an agreement which fit to your requirements. Definitely, we saw that. We think it's possible. I mean, we've closed, as I mentioned, 650 megawatts in emerging markets, which are very much complicated. Burkina Faso, Cambodia, Kazakhstan, etc. So we feel that by discussing with different developers and trying to have the parties all together, trying to understand each other and find the right way to go, then it's feasible. But at the same time, what we're trying to do is to join forces with both developers, investors, and international institutions to advocate towards to the government, to advocate for some changes in the regulatory framework, in the PPA, etc. Make sure we can attract non-recourse financing, make sure you can attract the necessary investment for the development, and increasing the success rate of developing assets. Make sure that you have a long-term planning so that you don't have bottlenecks on the grid or any other aspects. So all these ingredients we try to advocate them for them, and we join forces as a small player, smaller part of the main value chain, but we're trying to join forces with everyone to advocate for that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Karim. Thank you for your answering. And on behalf of ASEAN Clean Energy Week 2023, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Karim for sharing his profound insights. Thanks again. And this is all for today's interview. See you next time. Bye.